when the mind is basically, it's compartmentalizing and shutting off that part of the mind that experienced the trauma, and in doing so it creates these compartments which can then be turned into, quote, personalities. Do you know, Rich, I sat with a lady called Vera Diamond, who was a therapist. He worked in Harley Street, a very famous street for that sort of stuff, and medical stuff in London. But her business, if you like, her practice was destroyed the moment she started talking about Satanism and paedophilia and mind control among the rich and famous. But I became a very good friend of Vera Diamond. And I sat in her front room, and I saw in, 20 minutes, half an hour, something like 8, 9 different personalities come out of one girl. One of them was a child, a baby, and then some were absolutely evil, some were all different kinds of personalities, whatever. And what Vera was doing, she gleaned through her various techniques the trigger codes to access that personality. So you have the front altar, that's the person we all know, but then when you give the trigger, that front altar goes to the back, and one of the back altars comes forward. Now this person's a totally different personality. And I saw that just by Vera giving these trigger, there could be words, there could be phrases, whatever. And all through this, paedophilia was fundamental, because paedophilia and Satanism and torturing kids was, like I say, a major way that they created these altars. Now I've got the biggest secret in front of me, and I'm just going to read you a passage because I want people to understand the scale of horror that these kids go through and are going through now as I speak around the world. Kathy O'Brien has a daughter called Kelly, who I've met a number of times. Lovely, lovely girl, but my God, what happened to that kid? And Kathy O'Brien, one of the key people who traumatized her, well, among them, the key person was Father George Bush, an notorious paedophile, torturer and killer of children. As I've said all over America, I've said in my books, and there was Dick Cheney. He was brutal to Kathy O'Brien when she was older. Bill Clinton was involved in it. All these people are all connected. And Father George Bush delighted, and probably still delights, in causing maximum trauma to kids. And in this passage, she's describing how Father George Bush was using cattle prods on Kelly, just a little kid, to create the trauma and the pain. And this is what she says in Transformation of America. And this is what is happening to children in staggering numbers all over the world. She says Kelly became violently physically ill after her induction into George Bush's neighborhood, that's what we call it. And from every sexual encounter she had with him thereafter, she ran 104 to 106 degree temperatures, vomited, and endured immobilizing headaches for an average of 3 days, which is consistent with high voltage trauma. These were the only telltale evidences, aside from the scarring burns left on her skin. Kelly forbade me to comfort her, pitifully complaining that her head hurt too bad even to move. And she didn't move for hours on end. Kelly often complained of severe kidney pain, and her rectum usually bled for a day or two after Bush sexually abused her. My own mind control victimization rendered me unable to help to protect her. Seeing my child in such horrible condition drove my own wedge of insanity deeper, perpetuating my total inability to affect her needs until our rescue by Mark Phillips in 1988. Kelly's bleeding rectum was one of the physical indicators of George Bush's paedophile perversions. I had overheard him speak blatantly of his sexual abuse of her on many occasions. He used this and threats to her life to pull my strings and control me. The psychological ramifications of being raped by a paedophile president are mind-shattering enough, but reportedly Bush further reinforced these traumas to Kelly's mind with sophisticated NASA electronic and drug mind control devices. Bush also instilled, and this is what all these kids get, Bush also instilled the "who you gonna call and I'll be watching you" lines on Kelly, further reinforcing her sense of helplessness. The systematic tortures and traumas I enjoyed of a child now seem trite in comparison to the brutal physical and psychological devastation that George Bush inflicted upon my daughter. So this is the world that suddenly opened to me to see what was happening behind the scenes. And incidentally, the person who came to fetch Kathy O'Brien from her Satanist paedophile father to go into the mind control MK Ultra program was a man called Gerald Ford, who was the House of Representatives member for Michigan, where Kathy lived. So when you look at the fact that the CIA and the National Security Agency know everything that goes on around these people, not these presidents. So they knew what Bush is. It's well known among the insiders. And what did the CIA do? They named their headquarters after him in Virginia. And of course, what also was coming out in the 90s, and you've done interviews, Rich, about this on the show, was the Lawrence King paedophile ring. Lawrence King was a major Republican who was so big Republican he sang the national anthem at the Republican conventions in 1984 and 1988. And he was exposed by a guy called John W. Buchanan, the state senator in Nebraska, for running a paedophile ring, supplying children to rich and famous and politicians. And one of the people that some of the kids mentioned coming to Nebraska to take part was Father George Bush.
All true. Every word. I want to say that because, you know, I don't like interrupting. I'm treating this tonight as a kind of a lecture. Because you've been researching this for 25 years. There will be some of our audience horrified to hear you name the former president of the United States, the former head of the CIA, and name him as a paedophile. But you did in The Biggest Secret in 1998. As David just said, yes, Lawrence C. King was the most powerful black man in America and was proven to be taking children from Boys Town orphanage, flying them around the country, not only supplying them for these sadistic, disgusting parties that David has described, but also using children to set people up, set their enemies up, get children in uncompromising positions with their enemies, take photographs, and then blackmail them. These are some of the scummiest people on the planet. All of this is absolutely 100% true. I'm just saying that because I know there are going to be people listening on some of the other radio stations we're broadcasting on. They're going to be saying, Jesus, will you ever interrupt them and criticise what David is saying? The fact is, David said this in 1998, it was published. There's never been a whisper from anybody associated with the Bush family. Anywhere. Go ahead.
So what happened there, Richard? I was 3 months in America, the kind of maximum I could get out there on a visa. 90 days, is it?
That's right, 90 days.
And I met so many people. I actually, before I came home, I was actually talking at mind control conferences where people who were they call themselves survivors of mind control and paedophilia and Satanism were talking and giving their experiences. So I put together an enormous catalogue of information and documentation in that period, and I came home. What had been happening in this country is I was starting to meet people in this synchronistic way I talked about. And a name that kept coming up when I was talking to people who said they'd been abused and they'd been involved in satanic ritual was Ted Heath, Prime Minister of Britain, was it 1977, the man who took us into the European Union, as it's now called. And what I do, Rich, is people give me information, and I don't just blurt it out and say this is what's going on. I put it on the back burner, as I call it, and I let it simmer, and I see what else comes. And eventually there comes a point where you've got so much information pointing to the same thing and the same people from so many different sources, you reach that point where you think, I'm confident in going with this now. And so when The Biggest Secret came out, I said that in it, that Ted Heath, who was still an MP and didn't die until 7 years after the book came out, that he was a serial paedophile, my good serial paedophile. Are you having a laugh? Stunning. A child killer, a child torturer. Within days of the book coming out, a journalist at what passage rang Ted Heath and read the passage to him. 7 years before he died, he could have stopped me by going to court. There and then. Nothing. All he said was that David, I must be mad. And nothing happened. And what's happened, of course, since the Jimmy Savile thing, which we'll get into, is that other people are now naming Ted Heath and his connections to Jimmy Savile, who is a record-breaking paedophile, yes, but as we'll get to, a record-breaking child procurer for the rich and famous as well, which is why he was so close to the royal family and so close to the Thatcher government. And another person I met in that period in North Wales while I was researching this, and I went to North Wales because there was a big scandal emerging of a massive paedophile ring involving so-called care homes and children in North Wales. And the person I met was called Andrea Davison. I met her at her home. Andrea Davison was a British intelligence operative, then became also a mental health advocate. And she, in her work, line of work, had come across all these victims of paedophilia by the elite, rich and famous. And she actually represented the victims at the so-called inquiry into these care home scandals in North Wales, and she will come up as we go along more prominently. I was picking up information from her and others, and it was starting. I picked up about Dolphin Square, this block of flats where so many MPs live close to the Houses of Parliament, all the paedophile parties that are going on. That's in The Biggest Secret, and it's coming out now, of course, in the mainstream media, that was going on at Dolphin Square. More and more information is coming out about that. And then I met a lady called Christine Fitzgerald, and this took it on to another level, because Christine Fitzgerald was a friend for 9 years, a close friend of Princess Diana. And what happened, again, synchronicity. There was this, I hadn't seen him for ages, but he was a guy who operated in kind of alternative circles, and his big thing was networking. We must network, we must get people together. So what he did, how he did it, I don't know, he organised this little meeting of people at the House of Lords. I've only been to the Houses of Parliament twice, and this was the other kind. Actually, the other time I went to the Houses of Parliament was to watch a debate during the Thatcher era. And I just got in at the end of it when they were voting, and I'll never forget it. The Deputy Prime Minister, William Whitelaw, Deputy to Margaret Thatcher, came in at the top of the chamber, and he was so absolutely paralytically drunk. He staggered across to one side, hit the bench, staggered across to the other side, hit the bench, and then someone had to grab him and help him. He just voted. These are the kind of people that we have running our lives, ladies and gentlemen, and it's about time they weren't. Anyway, this event it was just kind of an hour and a half in a room in the House of Lords, and it didn't go anywhere really. But there was one person there, a lady, who said some very interesting things about Princess Diana, who had not long been killed. And afterwards, of course, being a researcher, I pulled her. How do you know this? And she told me that her friend Christine Fitzgerald, who was an alternative healer who operated at that time out of a clinic in Regent's Park in London, was a close friend of Princess Diana, and she thought that Christine Fitzgerald would talk to me. So I said, I want to talk to her. So a few days later, Christine Fitzgerald and this other lady, they walk off the Isle of Wight ferry where I live, and we sat down, and I've still got the tapes to this day, so I recorded it all. And she was telling me about Jimmy Savile, among other things. She was telling me about the horrific treatment of Princess Diana by the royal family, how the royal family actually were inhuman, which is something I've come across from many other sources, but here is this lady coming from that point of view as well. And that Jimmy Savile was a vile man, a paedophile, and a necrophiliac, i.e. he liked to have sex with dead bodies. This is why Jimmy Savile, famously, Jimmy Savile, in other parts of the world, was a great entertainer and a disc jockey, worked a lot for the BBC. This is why Jimmy Savile famously used to volunteer to be a porter in hospitals, because he got him access to the mortuary. I mean, this man was so unbelievably sick, words can't be found to describe it. Yeah. And so here is a man who it's now become clear was a known paedophile, and what he was doing was known by police, was known by many people, and here we have the British royal family inviting him into their inner circle, to the point where, as Christine Fitzgerald told me this, because Diana told her, but it's come out in other ways in the mainstream since, he was used as a go-between, a mediator between Princess Diana and Prince Charles when their marriage was breaking up. This man's an aging disc jockey, for goodness sake. And he was brought in to the royal family inner circle, in his own words, this is, in the 1960s, by Lord Mountbatten, a known paedophile. He was connected to the Kincora Boys' Home scandal in Belfast, though it was of course, kept quiet. Ted Heath was connected to the Kincora Boys' Home in Belfast, and so was a guy called Sir Maurice Oldfield, head of MI6. See why it doesn't come out?
Yes.
And Lord Mountbatten was famously a mentor to both Prince Philip and Prince Charles. And Jimmy Savile said that he was liked by the royal family and invited into their inner circle because this is his quote, "I work deep cover." Now what
could that mean, that?
What he was doing, as well as his record-breaking personal paedophilia, was Jimmy Savile was procuring children for the rich and famous, including former Prime Minister and Prime Minister at the time, Ted Heath. And this is why, despite everybody knowing, I say everybody knowing, lots of people knowing on the inside, and the police knowing, he was never collared while he was alive, because his back was being watched by the very establishment for whom he was supplying children. Because people had to watch his back if they were going to watch their own. And so here we had a situation, again, as with Father George